Hi, my name's Katie, and I have a rather embarrassing confession to make. But rather than just telling you, I think it'll be easier if I just show you. Here it is, the ugly truth. I have so many 2024 new releases that I haven't read yet. And this doesn't even include the young adult and children's new releases that I have as well. Should I grab some of them too? See what I mean? It's ridiculous. I literally can't even hold these, they're too heavy. Is that even gonna stay? I don't really trust it. That was literally a workout. But as you can see, I just have so many new releases from this year that I haven't touched yet. And look, I know I'm not somebody who has a great track record for like getting through all of the books that I buy immediately, but there's something about these new releases that I don't want to go into 2025 with this many from 2024, you know? Obviously, there's no way I'll be able to get through all of these by the end of the year, but I figure if we dedicate the next week or so to just getting through as many as we can, I'll feel a lot better about moving into the new year. So to kick this video off and build up a little bit of momentum for the week, I decided to dive into one of the shortest books on our stack. And I have to tell you, I really liked this book a lot, and I think I might have found a new perfect book for those of you who either want to start learning more about Palestine or a book to recommend to friends and family who don't know much but want to start learning. And that is, of course, this little book, The Sunbird. The book overall is almost 100 pages, but the story proper is 75 of those pages. In the first 75 pages of this book, we basically get to follow a character named Nabila at two different points in her life. The first, and where we first meet her, is in 1947 in Palestine, when she's a 5-year-old girl. And then the second timeline is her when she's 82 years old living in Sydney, Australia in 2023. And it starts quite gentle and calm and simple with the opening chapter basically just detailing her life as a 5-year-old in Palestine. But then obviously as the book progresses, as these chapters that we get in this moment progress, essentially we watch Nabila and her family living through the Nakba. Then in the current day timeline, or 2023 timeline, we get to see Nabila as she's living in quite like modest circumstances in Sydney, Australia. We're also seeing her attend the protests that have sprung up in the last year. And through that we see kind of both the hope that is stemming from, you know, the chants such as in our hundreds, in our millions, we are all Palestinian, but also the, I suppose, abject terror that comes with seeing your people genocided still after 75 years. So it's a very quick and easy read, a very accessible read. Like I said, it doesn't, like, yes, it does talk about the Nakba and the current genocide, but it does it all from Nabila's point of view, and it's all just kind of, it's quite quick and it's small, I think is the best way to put it. Intimate, maybe. And just a very brief but powerful look at the cost of the Nakba. And I suppose reintroducing that historical context that our current media landscape likes to try and erase. The final 20 pages of the book, the author takes the time to basically give us a very brief overview of that history in kind of more a non-fiction sense, from the Balfour Declaration to today. Much like The Sunbird, this is a tiny little book that represents so much more. And that is why I think that this is basically the perfect book to recommend to people, to suggest to people, to give to people who don't know all that much about Palestine but are ready to learn. For those people, this book will be the perfect place to start. Right now though, we are heading out because Blair and I are getting haircuts. So this is the last you'll see with my very long hair. And the other thing I need to do is to post some postcards. Back in September for my birthday over on Instagram, I essentially asked anybody who wanted to get me a birthday present to please donate on my behalf to the Samir Project. And I was so happily surprised by just how many people did. It was honestly so touching and the perfect birthday present. Thank you. I also said as a thank you for doing something so generous and kind, if anybody wanted me to, I would send them a little postcard as a thank you. Most people opted not to. They were happy just donating and sending me a little message to say happy birthday. But a few of you took me up on the offer. So if you did donate and you also sent me your address, keep an eye out for the postcard. And again, thank you so, so much. I'll leave a link to the Samir Project in the description box below. I mean, you can donate anytime. You don't just have to wait for my birthday. It's a great way to get some immediate necessities like tents and water to folks in Gaza right now. So the next time I see you, I will have shorter hair and hopefully we'll be stuck into our second book. What that's going to be, you know as much as I do. We'll just have to wait and see what I pick. We are home, we are fed, my hair is cut, and I've also washed it, so it's wet. There's a lot happening this afternoon, but most importantly of all, I've picked our second book, and I've started reading. I'm actually like 100 pages in. I don't know if you'll be able to guess, but this is The Ministry of Thyme. So far I'm having a good time, but let me tell you about it. Basically, we're introduced to our main character, who I think so far has remained nameless. It's funny when you have nameless characters, I always can't remember if they're nameless or if I've just forgotten their name. Anyway, at the beginning when we're introduced to her, we learn that she is basically like going for a top secret job at a top secret agency. Basically, this ministry, this kind of like top secret agency, has discovered time travel. And what they've done is like go throughout history and pluck a few people who like they know died just before they were about to die out of their timeline and brought them to our timeline, or a little bit in the future. And so our main character is hired kind of as like an assistant, but they're called a bridge. And she's assigned to one of these people from history to basically kind of like help him assimilate into the modern day. And our main character is responsible for and is taking care of a commander from the Navy in the 19th century. I mean, it kind of started out big and grand, you know, talking about time travel and shit, but now it's almost like a slice of life, kind of just with the two of them because they're living together. And so I can see how some people would think it's a little bit boring, but so far I'm liking it a lot. And I think one of the reasons I'm liking it so much is because I do tend to like timey-wimey kind of books, but one of my biggest criticisms of those timey-wimey books, or just like historical fantasy or whatever in general, is that they often just kind of like gloss over like the icky parts of history. This book, at least so far, is kind of like directly entangling all of that in the story and in us getting to know the characters. There also kind of seems to be like hints of a potential romance between two characters. I'm not sure, one, if I like that, or two, if that's where it's going to go. But anyway, there's your 100-page update. Me and my shiny book are going to get back to reading. Good morning, friends. I'm at work and I'm getting ready to open up the shop. I'm here a little early, although not as early as I had planned. So I do have some reading to update you on, but we need to do it quickly. Firstly, I have finished The Ministry of Thyme, and I know I was sounding kind of optimistic at our halfway check-in, or our 100-page check-in. I'm not feeling that way anymore. I did not really like this book. In the second half, maybe even the last third of the book, it kind of just basically turns into a romance. And firstly, I just like didn't understand the chemistry. I wasn't into the romance itself. But also it just felt like all of those conversations we were kind of hinting at, rather than diving into them and the complexities of them and the complexities of, you know, relationships within these dynamics and within these histories, it instead was just a romance. And I just didn't get it. I just didn't understand it. And a part of me just kind of feels like maybe this just isn't a book for me. The other part of me kind of feels a little frustrated by the book. I suppose I just don't really understand what the point of all of it was if we weren't going to reckon with it. So yeah, I don't know, just fell very flat for me by the end. Anyway, like I said, needed to make this check-in quick. I need to go get the shop ready to open. So I suppose I'll see you later. Hello, friends. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the fact that I'm a little bit flat right now. A couple of days ago, got like extremely overstimulated and kind of like had a shutdown sort of thing that I'm still trying to recover from. Anyway, to kind of cheer me up, I decided that I was finally going to get around to my most anticipated book of 2024. And that is, of course, Daughter of the Merciful Deep by Leslye Penelope. You might remember that last year, The Monsters We Defy by Leslye Penelope was my second favourite book of the year. It was very tight. I loved both of my top two in particular. It was an historical fantasy, and it was just, the characters, the world building, all of it just like captured me completely and immediately. So of course, I was going to be excited for her latest release, and we're finally getting to it. I've actually started. I'm like 120 pages in, and I'm already in. I'm already enjoying it a lot. I think this is set sometime in like the 1920s, 1930s in the American South, a time and a place that I don't know a huge amount about as an Australian. But our main character's name is Jane, and she's a young woman who is mute, kind of selectively, but also kind of not. It's complicated. We learn more about it as the story progresses. But basically she's living in this more or less all black town, this very self-sufficient community that has arisen and basically been built from scratch by some previously enslaved black folks. Most of the town knows some sign language, and there's a handful of people who are close to Jane who have learnt sign language so that she can communicate with everybody. There's also another character who's deaf, and so like this sign language is like an important form of communication for the entire town. Imagine that, taking the time to make sure disabled folks are part of and included in the community. Amazing. Anyway, early on in the book, some white folks in fancy cars start showing up, and they're telling everybody that they're like ministry officials, and they're like doing surveys and asking questions because basically there has been a dam built not too far down the river. It's close to completion anyway, and basically this town is going to become a reservoir. And obviously they're essentially telling an entire community that they just have to up and leave in the next 2 months. Then we're also getting introduced to some form of magic that's tied to like the gods from Africa. And it seems like there's some kind of magic that our characters can access, and in particular Jane can access, that's tied to both an object that she was given and also to memories. So it's kind of like tying like the power of story and the power of history into the magic itself. And I'm keeping my fingers and toes crossed that I continue to enjoy it because I don't know, I have high hopes for this one, I'm not going to lie. We'll just have to wait and see, and I will check in with you when I finished. Good morning, friends. I'm getting ready to film like a little clip for an outfit video, but before I got to that, I first really wanted to talk to you about Daughter of the Merciful Deep, because I have now finished it. And firstly, it pains me, but I feel like I need to get one thing out of the way, which is that I didn't love this one quite as much as I loved The Monsters We Defy. I just wanted to get that out of the way because I think it's really hard not to have some expectations when you love a book as much as I loved The Monsters We Defy when you're going into the next work by the same author, you know? But what I will say is that I still really, really liked this book, and that Leslye Penelope will be an auto-read author for me for whatever she brings out next. One of the things that I liked so much about The Monsters We Defy was how, yes, it was magical, yes, it was whimsical, yes, it was fun, but it was clearly like so rooted in history. And the same is very much true here with this book. And I am just kind of a little bit obsessed with the way that Leslye goes through history and finds kind of moments in Black American history that aren't as well known as they should be, and maybe at risk of being forgotten by, like, you know, the mass populace. She talks in the author's note about several points of reference throughout history for the events and for the people in this book, the characters. And Drowned Black Towns is something I feel like I've heard of before, but I didn't really know anything about it in detail. And so obviously that is one primary point of reference. That's not to say that she's retelling these events or these people's stories, you know, beat for beat. They're very much reference points and inspiration. But I think particularly in a book that is so much about story and about memory and about legacy, there's something so incredible about using those references, particularly the ones that are at risk of being more or less forgotten. In so many ways, this book is literally about white supremacy and racism, and there are some really hard, explicit moments tackling those subjects throughout the entirety of the book. But I do think Leslye Penelope has such a great way of incorporating these moments without making them feel like that's the entirety of Black American history. Like, the truth is there, the reality of all of that shit is there, and yet the center of this book, the heart of this book, is community, is solidarity, is legacy, is love. In so many ways, it's also a story about reclamation of so many things, reclamation of history, of a connection to ancestors, particularly African ancestors for these characters, a reclamation of power, a reclamation of voice, all of it. And that is something that these people do and achieve for themselves, which I think is a really important and powerful message for us right now. That reclamation, safety, security, freedom, these are not things that a lot of us can rely on the powers that be to offer us. They're things that communities build together. And the more I talk about this book, the more I love it. Anyway, we are reaching the pointy end of our week together, and I still have so many books I want to get to, but we knew going into this that I wasn't going to be able to read all of the books that I had on my stack. So I suppose I have some decisions to make, and I will see you when I have decided what we're going to be reading next. Can you believe it? Can you believe I have finished another book? And that book is Time Travelers, an anthology of Palestinian speculative fiction, edited by Sonia Sulaiman. This is actually another one of my very anticipated books of the year. But to be honest with you, Sonia is a friend of mine. I've known Sonia like online for years now. Sonia's been a part of my book club, my Patreon for years. So like, yes, I was looking forward to this because I had every faith in Sonia that it would be great. And I love a bit of speculative fiction. But equally, there's always a tiny part of you. Come on, be honest. There's always a small part of you when your friend does something really cool. You really, really want to like it. And you're a little bit scared that you're not going to. You know that feeling? Surely you must know what I'm talking about. But I am very, very happy to report that I loved Time Travelers. This is a collection of short stories centering Palestinian voices, and all of these short stories have like a bit of a speculative twist, some more than others. And obviously, with any anthology, with any collection, you're going to like some of the stories or the collected items a little bit more than you like others. But I have to say that this is just a really well-rounded collection. Like, the bar for this collection is really, really high. So I think there's 14 stories in all included in the collection. And as for my favourites, you know it's a good collection when you have trouble picking. I really liked The Generation Ship by Nadia Afifi. This one's about a family who, after their grandmother has died, they're inheriting like her memories, and watching how this influences not only the dynamics in the family, but also just like how they all think about and perceive their grandmother. Amazing. So well done. I really liked Serrano DAI, I think, by Carl L. Cura. This one centers a character whose brain has been augmented. And yes, this kind of augmentation is becoming more and more common, but basically it's about how he's kind of really reliant on this augmentation now for things as simple as like having conversations or even having relationships. I really liked The Front Runner and Remembrance in Cerulean. This one is basically about like mermaid aliens who live on Earth, and they have this ability to like share and capture like memories. Memories is definitely a theme that pops up in several of the stories. I think though my two favourite would be The 40 by Sonia Sulaiman. To me, that was the story that I just fell into the quickest. I just thought the writing was so beautiful. And my other favourite was The Centre of the Universe by Nadia Shamas. In this one, we're following a character who is like literally a character in a simulation. What a punchy way to end the collection. So yeah, all in all, just a really, really solid quality collection, and I'm so happy to have read it. Also, congratulations, Sonia. So how many is that? I think we've read 4 books together, which is great. I really do feel like I've got my reading mojo back. It's nice. And actually, I have started on book number 5. This is Towards Eternity, a novel by Anton. And this is actually my Patreon book club book for November. This is another sci-fi book. I feel like we've read quite a lot of sci-fi in this video, and I'm not too far in, but basically we're being introduced to a character named Han, who is one of the few people who have been involved in this experiment to basically like heal and replace an entire body with like nanobots, nanocytes. It seems like it's a bit of an experimental technology, but basically Han has like disappeared, and the police think that he was like kidnapped or he escaped the laboratory, whereas the doctor who's kind of in charge of the experiment seems to think that something else might have happened to him that relates to the experiment itself. It looks like this book is also going to be told from several different perspectives, points of view. So far it's also dealing with like AI and poetry and art in general. Essentially, I think it's going to ask lots of questions about like what it is to be human, what makes us human. And I feel like I might even finish this book today. We did it. We finished yet another book. I have finished Towards Eternity by Anton. It was a pretty quick read, to be honest. I finished it last night, but I was too tired to update you. And honestly, it's kind of one of those books that I wanted to just let mull for like a good 12 or 24 hours before I got chatting. So as we spoke about, this is a science fiction novel set somewhere in our future, a future where we're experimenting with curing people of diseases like cancer by basically replacing their bodies with nanites. And the book covers quite a lot of time from this development in technology to kind of like its end conclusion. I've heard some people say that this is literary sci-fi along the lines of Emily St. John Mandel, as opposed to like hard sci-fi. And I suppose to me, my reading of this, it kind of fell somewhere in between. This felt more hard sci-fi, at least to me, than like The Sea of Tranquility did. But equally, this book is definitely focusing an awful lot on like those philosophical questions, like what it is to be human and our relationship with technology, as well as with language. There is an awful lot of existential questions around language itself, the power of language, how we shape language and how language shapes us. I feel like Anton was definitely inspired, at least in part, by his experience as a translator in terms of some of the themes that are explored throughout this book. Overall, I did really enjoy the reading experience. I liked kind of the project of the book and like the framing of this technology that we're kind of watching evolve over decades, over generations, and sort of where it leads humanity. There were also moments that I thought were really beautifully written, and there were some elements of those existential questions that I just really liked reading about. I will say, at least for me, This is one of those books that I never forgot that I was reading from Anton Her. I love me a good book that explores existential questions. I love a book about like what it is to be human, what it is to be alive. And I'm also pretty okay with like some on the nose exploration of those themes. But I think there's definitely a line, and that line will be different for all of us as readers. And for me, at least, I still want to be swept up in the characters and the story that I'm reading. I don't necessarily love it as much when I feel like I'm very aware that I'm reading a thought experiment or exploration by the author. Does that make sense? So as interesting as I found it and as enjoyable as some of those explorations were to me, the characters and the story itself, I kind of feel like collapsed under the weight of all of that. I didn't really feel like they were quite strong enough in and of themselves to hold this book up. Maybe in part that is because we have so many different points of view, so it's not like we get to spend a huge amount of time with each character. I suppose if I'm being honest, some of my favourite books of the last couple of years have been like speculative literary fiction. I'm thinking in particular of Clara and the Sun and Sea of Tranquility. And while I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it's a great book, and I think there's a lot in here to enjoy and to sink your teeth into, it didn't quite end up on the same level. For me at least. But with all of that said, we have read 5 new releases this week, and I'm fully aware that I have so many more. My stack is still sitting over there looking at me, judging me, but I am quite happy to have smashed through, a sizable chunk. And can we just talk about like how much I liked most of these books? I mean, obviously my least favorite by a long shot was The Ministry of Thyme. But even that wasn't like a terrible read. It was fun and quick enough for what it was. It just kind of didn't go where I was hoping it would go. I think my second least favourite would be the Anton Her book, which is wild to me because I feel like in other lesser vlogs, this would be one of my favourites. And then we had 3 books that absolutely smashed it out of the park for me, and 3 very different books. It feels hard to compare them. And if I had to broadly recommend any of these books, it would be The Sunbird. Please read this, please pick it up. And even if you're somebody who knows plenty about Palestine, you don't need convincing of what's going on in Palestine right now, pick this book up and like give it to somebody. Recommend it to somebody. This is a book that I think should be and needs to be read widely. Then obviously we had our short story collection, which genuinely is one of my favourite short story collections that I've read in quite a while. I will be thinking about several of these stories for a long time to come. And then obviously we had The Daughters of the Merciful Deep, which I also loved. And honestly, it's one of those books that the more I think about it and the longer I sit with it, the more I love it. Let me know in the comments below if there's a particular 2024 release that is haunting you and that you're hoping you'll get to before the end of this year. Of course, a big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie, and also Kat and Amy, who are new patrons. Thanks so much. It's so nice to have you. But anyway, thank you so much for spending the last week with me. I will chat with you in the comments and in the next video. Until then, happy reading. Bye.